Afternoon, everyone. Guess he's
Hello?
working on it. Trying to get the right green lights on.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Charlotte Williams. I am Professor and Director of the Center on Community Philanthropy here at the Clinton School of Public Service. Welcome to our public program. This afternoon, you're going to get a chance to have a nice fireside conversation with myself and Monica Haslip. You've all seen her biographical information. You know what an amazing racial healing practitioner she is. So we're going to spend the next few moments just having a dialogue about the amazing work that she does, the incredible structures and systems that she's already impacted for social change, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. How does that sound? All right.
Okay.
All right, well, Monica, it has been my honor to host you as the inaugural Distinguished Scholar in Racial Healing Practice here at the Clinton School Center on Community Philanthropy.
Thank you. Thank you.
It has been a wonderful week. So let me just start out by asking that you tell us a little bit about yourself and the amazing work of Little Black Pearl.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Is it afternoon yet or still morning?
It's still morning.
Still morning. It's still morning. Um, I started an arts organization 28 years ago. And I really started it because my background, I'm an artist, and I was working at Black Entertainment Television at the time doing marketing. So I thought I was going to teach some art classes on the weekends as my community service. And I wanted to do it in a community that reminded me of the one that I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. So I bought an abandoned building in Chicago on the South Side. And I bought it without seeing the inside, which tells you a little bit about my personality. And I spent a couple of years preparing that space to invite young people to come in and teach them the connection between art, education, and business. So Little Black Pearl, we've done that work for the past 2 decades. I was in my home for 11 years where I started, and I built a new facility in 2005. So I went from 2,000 square feet in my house to 40,000 square feet. And in that 40,000 square foot space, we expanded and started doing programs for youth and adults. And it all focused on the business of art. So that gave me the opportunity to expand into doing programs around education. So I opened and founded a high school 10 years ago called Little Black Pearl Art and Design Academy. We provide a variety of different programs in the space. But about maybe 12 or 13 years ago, I got introduced to Dr. Gail Christopher at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And Dr. Christopher was in Chicago visiting, and she came by Little Black Pearl and looked around and said, "Who built this place?" And they told her that an African-American woman had built the space. And she said, "I need to meet her." So they called me, and I came over and met her, and we walked through that space, and she said, "I know what this represents. I know what this means. I know how much work you've had to do to accomplish this. So I want to invite you to consider doing work with us at the Kellogg Foundation as a partner." So we started out with the America Healing Program with W.K. Kellogg Foundation, where my children got a chance to begin to have a voice about issues of equity and racism. And then that experience really helped me to understand how I needed to deepen my understanding of my own work. So I began to think about, how does art play a role in building movements? How does art play a role in racial equity? So that led me to a lot of the work that I've been doing over the past decade. I am a trained racial healing practitioner. I've spent the last 5 or 6 years traveling around the country, training other racial healing practitioners. I'm still an artist and designer. I design spaces in Chicago, and I consider myself a person who really activates love. I believe that love is the anchor of everything that I do, and I've had the opportunity to infuse that in the work that I do as a racial healing practitioner. So to kind of sum up 28 years, it really has been a beautiful journey that's been very complex. We have a complex ecosystem at Little Black Pearl. We provide a variety of different programs there. And I am continuously on the journey of trying to make sure that I can be a part of what it takes to help us begin to see our common humanity. And that's the work that I've been doing for the last 28 years.
Thank you very much for that. You know, I think it's so interesting to hear how you have integrated your practice, your racial healing practice, through this work of art. So can you share how you believe art in particular is an excellent, or is it a great conductor of the kind of change and transformation that those of us in the racial healing space are seeking?
Well, you know, I think that artists are very courageous. They're the ones that actually take the risk to share with us in a lot of different mediums, whether it's music or visual arts, you know, the stories that we need to be reminded of and the vision that we need to think about and see as it relates to, you know, having the world that we want to live in. You know, what does it look like to design and create the world that we want to live in? And artists tend to have the courage to explore that and to share that with us. And I think that artists have played a very significant role in every movement. Every movement that has existed historically, we can look at the role that many artists have played in advancing those movements. So I believe that art, just like everything else, I always tell people, particularly in Black communities, art, like everything else, is the thing that moves us to change. It's the machinery that we need to invite us to change quickly and creatively. So that is sort of my mantra. I've really tried to make sure that artists were a part of this movement where we are working collectively to eliminate the hierarchy of human value and to find ways to help people recognize the challenges that racism creates, not just for those of us who are like totally oppressed and have been oppressed for years, but for everybody. And so artists have a way of speaking the language that everybody can connect to. And so that's why I believe this, as an artist, being a part of the racial healing work is really critical.
You know, as we too are part of the America Healing here at the Center on Community Philanthropy. So we too have had the the opportunity to get a chance to build out work over time um, through convenings and help to build it out through scholarship. But I know that you and your work have been a part of some major racial healing initiatives, like the GW272. Can you share a little bit with folks about that?
Yeah, sure. So a few years ago, I don't know if some of you might be familiar with some of the challenges that Georgetown University have faced when a group of the students on campus really highlighted the fact that Georgetown University participated in the sale of 272 enslaved people in exchange for resources that helped to keep the university afloat. And so I got a call a few years ago from Kellogg asking if I would come in and facilitate conversations between the descendants, Georgetown University, and the Jesuit priest that were a part of the Catholic Church, and the Jesuits who actually were connected to the sale. So I came in and met with the descendants first, the family, and it was an opportunity to invite them to begin to see that it was important for them to show up with Georgetown and the Catholic Church as one family. As you know, any family, there are people who have different ideas of what they believe is the best way to address the issue. And in that family, they had the same thing. So I spent time with them really helping them establish an understanding of their common values. Many of them came together as a result of this discovery at Georgetown. So they didn't know each other either. And so, the need to build and deepen relationships became really important. And then on the other side, I worked with the Jesuits. We had the 7 top Jesuits in the country because they were responsible for really coming up with a response to this issue that had been raised at Georgetown. And many of them, just like often people say, this is not my issue. I didn't do anything to cause this. So we spent time with them really talking about the impact of that sale on the descendants of that family and how the issues that existed back then and what occurred, how that still plays out today in that family. And finally, after months of working with them, we brought them together. And the goal really at that time was to really hold space for them. And for me, I believe my role often is to just bring as much love in the space as possible, to create a trusting container so people can have hard conversations. And when I got there, I knew it was going to be a really, really tough conversation. But the opportunity to bring them together in a way that they realized that they could trust the environment and the container that was created where they could tell the truth, they could speak their truth, and they could be encouraged to listen in a different way. Instead of, I call it the difference between head listening and heart listening. And so we brought them together over a year, and we spent time doing everything from bringing experts in and in having them give them information about the impact of racism on health, the impact on racism on the on economy. We talked about we took them to the Whitney Museum, really so they can have experiences and show up as individuals and not necessarily just representatives of the Catholic Church. And so over time, we spent that year deepening those relationships so they could then come up with a vision for what they collectively thought they wanted to do to address this issue around reconciliation. And they decided that they wanted to establish a foundation. And so now the foundation exists. The board is made up of descendants, Jesuits, members from Georgetown University, and the Catholic Church committed to raising $100 million for this foundation, which in turn will provide education, housing, and all the issues that they collectively decided was most important to kind of reconcile. So it really is an example of how the work of racial healing can work to change policy or to change systems. And that's really, for me, what the work is about. Racial healing is sort of an anchor that allows us to invite people to deepen relationships so they can then see themselves in the other. So when they get the opportunity in their seat of power, whatever that is, they might make a different decision. And so that's really an example of the kind of work that I believe truth, racial healing, and transformation can do.
That's a good segue into where I want to go, because I know that the months of that process and all of the different conversations that you all were having in order to bring the kind of transformation, that at some point you had to define what is racial healing.
Right. We
We had to get to a point that everyone could agree on. So if you could define and describe for the audience, what would you say racial healing is?
You know, I think first I would say that healing means something different to every person. And so that is an important thing to acknowledge on the front end. Racial healing, for me, is an opportunity for us to understand, explore our interconnectedness. It's a methodology that allows us to use tools to ask questions that invite us to see our common humanity. And so a lot of times when we are dealing with the challenges that we have, particularly in this country, you know, the polarization and all of the issues we have around separation, there are very few times that we're invited to be in spaces where our truth really matters and where we have the opportunity to speak it with some level of trust and without fear. And so a part of what racial healing is, it's the opportunity to create the environments that are conducive for people to share their stories with one another so they can discover their common humanity. And that to me is the best way that I could describe racial healing.
I identify with that as well. It really is the connectedness of how we can transform the narratives, narrative change, not only how we feel about ourselves, but how we think about others. And I know that in addition to bringing your wisdom to our campus, you've been working on something this week. So can you tell us a little bit about your scholar's essay that you've been working on and writing this week?
I can. I think it's funny when I started writing it, I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting because what I have to say really focuses a lot on what I believe. And I believe our beliefs define our actions, right? And so I believe that love is a transformative power, and that if we're able to approach it like an action, then we're able to see the results that it may create along the way. And so in this paper, I'm really talking about the connection between racial healing and it being anchored by love, and the need to ensure that we understand that truth is important. Truth is a very significant part of healing. Racial healing is the part of the equation that helps us to build relationships that set up the opportunity for transformation. And so the paper really kind of takes us through that concept of how truth is important, racial healing is the activation of it, and then transformation occurs if we kind of have this vision for what we're trying to work towards. I'm a believer that, we can't really move beyond racism if we don't believe it's possible. And so I am always looking for ways that I can create models or I can create examples of a vision of what's possible. And so that, to me, is what I'm talking a bit about in the paper, because I tell people, if somebody gave us a key tomorrow and said that when you turn this key, racism is over, the question I have is, are we ready? Have we thought about what life would be beyond it? And so the idea of us being in these constant states of battle and fight really doesn't give us a lot of room to imagine the possibility of what life is like beyond it. And so I try to stay really anchored and focused as much as possible on the vision of being beyond this, because we have to have a very thoughtful group of people who have the willingness to do that work, because that work is just as important as all the other work that we're doing to deal with racism. The vision of the possibilities of what this life is like beyond racism is the work that we have to continue to do.
Well, I'm so excited that you were here to write that paper for us, and even more excited that we will be publishing it along with other scholars in racial healing practice. So I do want to give time for a couple of questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions for Monica, you can raise your hand. I think there are a couple of mics that are floating around. If there are any questions. Yes, Dean Soto.
inter-minority dialogue, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking of what happened in Los Angeles, right?
Yep.
So we technically think of racial healing among, you know, majority populations, minority populations. But have you facilitated inter-minority dialogue?
Yes, yes. And what I would say about that is because, you know, in this sort of structure that we're operating in the systems, you know, we've all been categorized in groups. And so the opportunity for people to actually be individuals is really the blessing of racial healing work. And so bringing together people of color, helping them to have dialogue about their interconnectedness and the fact that, you know, we all have been impacted by racism, every single person. And so as a result, bringing them together individually to talk about the impact of having that vision of moving together collectively is important. I mean, I haven't had an experience where bringing together people of color is any different than bringing together people of other diversities. Because I think we all, in the end, the way that racial healing circles operate, the goal is to prompt and ask questions that help us see our connectedness and help us see how our common humanity is lifted up. So I think that, you know, racism is embedded everywhere, and unfortunately it's not impacting people that are just black and white. It is impacting all people, and the opportunity for us to continue to tell that truth and to have conversations about some of the things that have developed inside of our cultural experiences, just as even with people of color and African Americans, the skin color issue. You know, these are all things that are a direct result of you know, this false sense of hierarchy. And so that having the opportunity to have people sit together and have conversations honestly about how they have been impacted, but also how their agency helps people to see how they're connected, you know. And so that's really the work that I think racial healing can do, even in the BIPOC community. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that it's not them against us. We actually, in general, are all affected by it. And the recognition of that and the truth of that helps us to begin to heal from it and begin to deepen our relationships. And it's usually a friend of mine named Elizabeth Medicine Crow. Elizabeth says that the shortest distance between two people is a story. And honestly, it's not until we're able to sit with one another in sacred spaces and trusting spaces that we are able to have the opportunity to speak our truth. And that truth usually has some resonance in it with the person that they're speaking with. And that is a habitual thing that we have to do in order for healing to occur. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. And it doesn't happen with one healing circle. It happens when we individually make a commitment to seeing each other and, you know, with new eyes, and allowing us to hear and speak our own truth, and a level of empathy, compassion, and support to actually move through it. It's a very difficult time, and so many things are actually being lifted up that have been sort of under the surface. And we're all trying to wrap our heads around it in ways. And a lot of things that we didn't realize was happening or did realize was happening are now out in the open. And so it's an opportunity for us to be honest about it and to have some truthful conversations with each other and to work towards the healing that we need in order to get the transformation that we all hope for. And that's what I believe has to happen with people of color as well. Yeah.
Another question. Yes, right in the back.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Rachel, and thank you so much for being here today. My question is, so for one of our assignments for one of our classes, we're supposed to interview a public servant. And, excuse me, I talked to someone yesterday who works in the banking system, and she really illuminated a lot of practices that still exist today in the banking system that really promotes, they're really part of systemic racism. And I was for some reason, I was really surprised. I was like, I just can't believe this still exists. So I was wondering, from your experience or your personal opinion, are there certain areas in our society or sectors or places where you feel that this work deserves more attention?
Wow. Thank you for that question. I think what I love about the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation framework is that there are 5 components of it. There is the narrative change component, racial healing, and then there is law, economy, and separation. And so those 3 categories at the bottom of this framework really sort of capture all those areas where we have structural and systemic racism. And so narrative change and racial healing are the anchoring parts of the framework. And so I think that looking at that framework as an opportunity to address issues like what's happening in the banking system, that systemic racism, it really gives, for me, a tool. It gives me a tool, for example, to identify those systemic challenges and have a way to address them. So the example that I will give is, like, in my work, I really struggled with this notion of narrative and understanding that the narrative about the contributions that people of color have made to this country needs to be expanded. And so when I thought about that framework, narrative change anchored sort of the conversation, but, you know, law and economy became important to me. So I decided to build a business model that allowed me to focus on narrative change. So I created a restaurant and the restaurant is called Carver 47. And it's designed to expand the narrative about Dr. George Washington Carver, who has been reduced to the peanut man. But the reality is Dr. Carver has made huge contributions in a lot of different areas. So that business model helped me to begin to expand his narrative. But inside of that model, I am also focusing on economic development, workforce development. So in that category of economy, I have now taken the narrative change anchor and created a business model that lets me focus on workforce development and economy in an industry where people of color have been marginalized. So I say that to say that these systems that have been designed and created to perpetuate racism, it is our responsibility to begin to figure out what our vision is to create new systems, to push against the systems that currently exist. And so that, to me, is, I would say I don't think that there's any system more important than the other, but that framework helps to guide me when I think about what systems need to have some change. And it helps me to pick what I can do in my seat to affect change on those systems. So I've done that with the restaurant, but I also did it when I opened the high school. The high school was really about focusing on ensuring that every child had a good education and was able to thrive. But it came out of a discovery that in the district in Chicago, in the system, there were a huge number of African American children who had dropped out of school, who were between the ages of 14 and 16. And what I learned was that if you're between 14 and 16, if you drop out, you can't get back into school because you can't enroll in an alternative school. And you can't, you have to be received by your home school, and that's not a reality for a lot of children. So it then created an opportunity for me to think about, how do I push against this system to change this? So I applied to open my own school, and my school receives children that are off track for graduation between the ages of 14 and 16. And so those children can enroll in my school, and now I know, even though that challenge exists within the system, I'm pushing up against that system to encourage them to change and to give them a demonstration of why it's important to change and what are the benefits of it. So I've had the school now for 10 years. All of my children came to me largely off track for graduation. We have had 100% graduation every year since we started school. And so I think my point is that these systems, we have to show examples of how they can be dismantled. It goes back to the beginning of me talking about having a vision for what is possible and to be able to have the courage to try to push against these systems and give new examples of what we can do so the world looks more like the world we believe we deserve collectively.
Thank you. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much, Monica. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, all of you. Please stay connected, follow us. We will be publishing Monica's paper. It will be coming along as part of our compendium. And thank you to all of you who attended today, and for those of you who believe in racial healing. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.